Thanks for tuning in to Product Chats. On today's episode, I talk with Leo Gong, who is the VP of Product at Apartment List, and we talk about the why and also putting people first. So hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to leave us a review. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Hey, Kayla.
So in a minute or less, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. My name is Leo. I'm the VP of Product at Apartment List, and I'll just give a really quick breeze through of my career. So I started off in management consulting. I worked at Bain & Company for 2.5 years. Got bitten by the startup bug. I left, taught myself how to code, and built my own startup. Bounced around between Singapore and San Francisco and Australia. And before I eventually went to join Dropbox, where I joined right before they crossed the 200 employee mark. I worked there in sales operations, where I kind of realized that we had a lot of problems where there were too many inbound leads. And so I built a really simple model that kind of using historical data predicted who was likely to convert versus not. And that was like the really early version of a lead scoring algorithm. That then led me to my next company, where I was hired on as the very first PM at a Series A startup that was actually offering machine learning, sort of like lead scoring, algorithmic demand generation. That was Everstring. I worked there for a couple of years, and then I eventually left to join Evernote, where I basically worked on the Evernote for Business product and really launched a brand new product there. And then finally, that led me to Apartment List, where I've been here for the last almost 4 years.
So something I want to kind of dive into, what are, like, you said you started out in sales operations, like what is that skill set that was really valuable in sales operations that has kind of also led to your success in product management?
Yeah, I really think a lot of my experience in management consulting. To be honest, I think my experience at Bain really taught me that you can basically solve any problem, because you're kind of expected to come out of college and then you're expected to go figure out, I've worked on cases for semiconductor manufacturers. I've assessed like whether or not it made sense to acquire, let's say, a fish vaccine manufacturer. Like a lot of these things you kind of pick up and you start learning, you see patterns around. It's not the actual technical knowledge that oftentimes you need to figure out a problem. It's really just understanding what the issues are and kind of diving into it. And so having that basis was really helpful for me when I joined Dropbox. So I was actually in business operations, but I was doing a stint in sales operations. And at that point in time, Dropbox had only, one really big floor in which we had maybe people taking up a quarter of it. And so people would be scooting from one side of the office to the other. We had 6 salespeople actually at that point in time. And people would be hopping onto chat while they were commuting to work on the Caltrain. So really exciting times, but really, really unstructured. And so that experience at management consulting was really helpful, because you're coming into a really unstructured environment where sometimes the problem wasn't necessarily defined. So you were kind of looking around for what were the issues. And then I think that skill set really allowed me to succeed at that point of Dropbox's, maturity to kind of just go and figure out what was the problem and then just figure out creative solutions to them.
So with that, right, figuring out the problem, obviously in product, that's what you want to get to, right? What is the problem or challenge that our customers are dealing with? And so when you're actually trying to figure that out, what are things you're doing that you get to get close to your customers, or what are some of your favorite things to do to really understand your customer?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's really around talking to your customers and being very good at asking the why questions. So that's something that I've been really, fortunate and excited about doing here at Apartment List. For example, we have a pretty incredible user researcher, and we spend a lot of time, talking to customers. And I think where I've seen some differences in product orgs is there are some product orgs that don't talk to customers as much, which I think it makes innovation a lot more difficult. And then there are product orgs where user research is maybe set aside as almost its own siloed org, and their job is to go talk to customers and then conduct a readout, and then PMs maybe consume the readouts and figure out what to do. That doesn't work very well either. The reason for that is because the PM oftentimes has an idea of where they want to bring their product. And a lot of these insights usually happen organically. Similar to this podcast, being able to go into a mindset of curiosity and then see where the conversation takes you, I think gets you to a lot more interesting insights than if you came with a pre-prepared list of questions, which is oftentimes a little bit more what the model where a siloed model leads you to. The user researcher will pre-prepare a list of questions and go in. So where I've really liked and how I've applied, research and understanding to new product development is a joint session between PM and user research. We usually start with a list of questions just to understand the customer and really dig into the why. We'd probably ask why 2 or 3, 4, or 5 times. We'll ask for it. Just to give you an example of some recent conversations we had, we were talking to some properties and trying to understand what their thoughts were on maybe the short-term rentals market. And we asked about which competitors they work with and what their thoughts were there. And when they started talking about, oh, this thing didn't work particularly well, we would ask why. Okay, so this is the reason why it doesn't work well, but then why do you care about that? And oftentimes I think people don't go down to why enough. And I think where the PM comes in, because the user research is really good at digging into the why you want the PM there is because the PM can then live oftentimes see some potential solutions just to test, litmus test and see if we're getting it right. Oh, so if I understand your pain point, if we were to do this, how would that sound to you? And I think that's super invaluable to be able to get that live interaction versus taking it offline from the user researcher, building something, and then testing it maybe two or 3 weeks later with a customer.
So I think something that you mentioned, right, the why, and I think that's something that's super important as like a product manager is to always have that kind of natural curiosity of like, what is the base cause? Because if you try to solution, then you just hop to that and you're skipping out probably on the pain. So how do you make sure, right, you're listening to customers, you're working with UX? Are there other ways where you're like, let's make sure we fully understand this? Besides the why, right? Are there other ways that you're kind of setting up your team for success?
Yeah, I think this is it's a work in progress. I think because what I've realized is a lot of product orgs really just don't do it very well or in a very structured way. And so the process that we've actually laid on over time was for the first phase when I started working and leading product here was really just introducing and being very explicit about user problems and personas and then making it front and center. So almost every single one of our product presentations, whether it be user research or product design, product analytics or product management related presentations, almost all of them start off with what the user problem is. And beyond just saying, as this person, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is why I can't do it, I spend a lot of time actually digging into what the sub-user problems are. So our user problems, when we write them, are usually the high level, and then there'll be a sub-bullet, maybe multiple sub-bullets, and then there might be multiple sub-bullets. Because I think that's sort of a really good way to prompt people to go down into, the why a couple of times. And then I think probably surprising to most people when they initially start working here, I spend probably 50% of the time when I'm reviewing a document on actually the user problem statement. All the other stuff, what the solution is, what the mocks are, that's the other 50% of the time. But I really, really pay a lot of attention to, are you framing this the right way? Is this truly validated? What gives you the confidence that this truly is an issue? So that's really been, I think, the first phase of just building discipline around digging deep and putting it across all the parts of the org and layering it into templates to really make that natural over time. And then the second phase is really digging into the complexity behind the users' lives and truly understanding them. And I think that is also really, really hard. I think I've worked at Evernote and Dropbox. And I think when you look at a lot of the productivity tools out there, one of the challenges of a productivity app, and you can also put in any of the other ones like Notion or Slack or whatever, is the beauty of the productivity app is fluid, right? You can have 20,000 different use cases in Evernote and in Dropbox. And oftentimes the product teams can get a little bit lost because you kind of don't know what you're trying to build for. And then you end up just building features and then you don't really know how your features are being used, but you just keep building more. And I think that's the bit I think a lot of productivity apps struggle with. And even as a marketplace for a partner list, we see that too, because a lot of what we're trying to do in our mission is to make renters more productive and to make leasing agents and marketers much more productive. And the second thing that we try to do to really instill this why or user-driven approach in our product org is we're really pushing the PMs and the designers and the user researchers to go really deep. So I basically, tell them, I want you to go so deep that our clients would want to invite you to a conference to talk about how they could do their jobs better. And I think most of us never really truly get there. It's like, I want you to understand the systems that you use. I want you to understand your workflows in and out. I want you to understand your schedules and what they care about. But you should become truly, truly an expert in terms of how they should be doing their jobs if we want to be able to create great product.
So one thing you talked about, right, is the why. So that's when you're like building it out. But I kind of want to dive a little bit into iteration and how you decide what you're going to iterate on and how you kind of like prioritize.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think prioritization is always a little bit more of an art than it is a science, but I can maybe break it out a little bit, actually in a slightly more scientific way, which is ideally what you want is you first want a product vision. And that's really what the product leader needs to be opinionated and really be able to drive alignment and consistency around. And so for apartment for instance, the product vision is we want to build a rental concierge. Renting, it's a huge pain point. It's super meaningful for people. But today, when you look on our competitor sites, for instance, you're sort of left to your own devices, right? It's, oh, here's 10,000 pins and good luck with 5 pages worth of data and 20 photos. Go look through all of them, spend 40 hours, and then come back and tell us who you want to contact. And so what our product vision is, we want to be that concierge that really helps people rent smarter and faster and all of those things that help them be more productive on both sides, for renters and for leasing agents. And I think having that overarching product vision allows you to figure out essentially between your different product ideas, which ones you do the natural normal things, which I think, everybody does, which is impact and confidence and the cost. Right. But I think you're looking really for strategic alignment and you want to essentially create a thread or a narrative around this is the thing that is going to be really, really difficult to do over time. For instance, enabling a tour booking concierge that could tell you, hey, Kayla, we understand that you are free for 4 hours on Saturday morning. Here's a suggested itinerary based on the availabilities that we see. That's a really long-term kind of roadmap that might take a year, might take 2 years because there's a lot of like discrete pieces in there. But if you've got the product vision, then I think it gives you staying power to stay on one thread for a really long time. Where I've seen also product orgs go off track is without a really clear product vision and a clear belief, product teams don't know where to keep iterating. They'll try something, and if it doesn't work the first time, they'll give up. But we try to essentially, you pick the idea based on the normal prioritization, but then based on the strategic alignment or how it aligns to your vision, we usually ask teams to give it a strong couple of tries before they move on to a different idea.
I think part of that also, right, is aligning that, right, company goals with how you build out your product, always making sure there is that loop. So what you talked about, like there can be distractions, right, in productivity tools. It's does this actually align with what we're trying to achieve as a company? And so I want to get into, I know you started your own company. So like, tell us a little bit about how you launch a new product or how you create a product from scratch.
Yeah, I think I made a lot of mistakes when I launched my first company. We can definitely go into that. But if the question is how not to do it, that would be a really, really good one. I think how to do it is more recently, I think, both at Dropbox, at the Series A company for machine learning, and also at Apartment List. And I can kind of go through that. But basically, the way I think about how you launch a new product is there's maybe, I would say, 2 big phases. The first big phase is really aligning on the why. So this is the why when it comes to the company. Why are the execs excited about this? Or, why the steering want us to do this? I think getting really, really crystal clear on that, I think is really important. And then once you align on the why, I think it's really figuring out what the product market fit is. And that is validating that you've got the right hypothesized customer, you've got the right problem that you've identified for them, and you've got a solution that works both for them, but also for the business. So, like it needs to do what it needs to accomplish for the customer, but it needs to be scalable for the business. It needs to make money for the business. Those are the 2 high level places where it's sort of my playbook that I roll out, everywhere I go, whenever I try to launch a new product. And I'm happy to go deeper on any one of those pieces.
So what are a few things not to do when you're creating a new product?
Yeah, a few things not to do when you're creating a new product is, for example, if the CEO were to say, hey, it'll be really cool if we launched a new product that did this thing. and then just going off and doing it. I think a lot of times where that ends up going wrong is two ways. One way is there isn't a clear alignment on what success looks like, because saying that you're going to build this feature is not sufficient to answer the question of what does it actually need to provide to the business for it to justify deeper investment. So that's one place where a lot of times things go wrong. And I think what might end up happening if you don't do this is you might spend couple months, maybe even a year, and you go and build this really, really amazing product that did exactly that. It's really cool features, like the technology that no one else does. But then ultimately you launch it. And then after a couple of months in the market, when the business is looking at where it wants to deploy its resources for the next couple of years, it's kind of up there. And the rest of exec and everyone else who are kind of discussing priorities look at it, and it's not really clear. Like, why is it part of our portfolio? Like, how does it contribute? And how much resourcing does it justify? So that's one place where it tends to go wrong. The second place is even when you don't run into issues, maybe the idea was perfect and, you build it and you launch it and it does all the right things. And in that case, I call it like just hitting the jackpot. And there are like really, really great companies out there who basically did just that. So if the founder story is usually, I was doing this thing and I had this problem and I built the solution for myself and I launched it. And then before I knew it, there were tens of thousands of people using it. That is one of the lucky jackpot cases. And the second thing that could go wrong in those cases is you might actually have a product that grows and grows and it becomes really, really successful, but it will struggle to grow beyond that because you don't have a really crisp articulation of the why behind it. Like, why was it successful and who was it truly for and all of those different things. So one other thing that could often go wrong is really over investing in a new idea. So whenever we have a new idea, what I really like to do is I like to keep the team really, really small. Usually it's maybe 3 to 5 people. So it's one engineer, one designer, one product person, and usually a go-to-market or operations person. Because most of the time these days, at least in the marketplace, the things that you launch aren't purely just R&D. But where I've seen it gone wrong is people throw too much fuel onto the fire before you kind of figure out what is the thing that you actually want to light up.
So I think with that, right, it's about figuring out that market fit, actually listening to your customers rather than just being like, let's just build this thing out because. And so I think something you talk about also to kind of go back to like your first point is as a product leader, you have to be comfortable saying no, right? You have to say, well, even if the CEO thinks this is the best idea, it may not be the best idea. So like, how do you actually push back to a CEO that's saying, hey, we should build this out? Or how do you make sure there's still like alignment and you're communicating that vision around what's best for the product?
Yeah, that is a really, really great question. And I think it actually comes back to, I like to joke with the people I work with that everything in life is actually just product management, but it basically comes back to the why as well. So the way and I've had this conversation multiple times with multiple different CEOs or directors or others, and it actually comes down to the why for them. So why are you, really excited about this idea? And I think if you actually go a couple of whys deep, you can actually, if you can echo back, oh, okay, the reason why you're really excited about this idea is because you believe that there's a huge growing market that is really untapped. You feel like the margins of this are going to really complement our business really well. You feel like X, Y, and Z. I think if you're able to repeat back, oftentimes that's what the CEO is really trying to communicate. And then you can then say what your idea could be for how you could actually achieve that in a different way. You could say, okay, understanding that's what you want, taking what you just said as the seed of it, let me build upon that. And what do you think about this? And I think usually that goes across really, really well when you're able to actually reflect that back.
So this is kind of talking about those relationships and putting people first, right? So let's kind of pivot into putting people first. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the things I really like about Apartmentlist. I've honestly learned about that a lot here. I think people do their best work when they feel like their interests are taken care of, because what that means is they can come into work and they can show up and really just think about the customers and less around, how do I get this thing that I need? And so I think as a leader, and a huge part of that really is around empathy. You can't put people first if you don't understand what drives people or what they're struggling with. And I think empathy, I think, is really the number one thing. And there's a couple of things that I try to do in either my one-on-ones or in my interactions, even in a group setting with people that I work with. In one-on-ones, I think we can get really explicit, which is after you go through and you build trust and credibility with each other, which is really important as foundations. I usually just ask the same couple of questions every beginning of the one-on-one, which is overall, how happy are you? And then the sub questions underneath that is, what's your level of excitement? How intellectually challenged are you? And how busy are you? And I ask people to rate where they are on a scale of 1 to 10. And then the other thing I do is I actually ask them to also tell me where they want to be on the 1 to 10, because not everybody is a 10 out of 10 excitement kind of a person. For me, the highest I probably ever get will be a 9.5 out of 10, and that will last for 2 hours before it comes back down. And so my happy point is probably a 7 or an 8. Some people like to be really busy. Some people like to be super intellectually challenged. And I think it shifts as well. It depends on what's going on in your life. I think a lot of people over the pandemic and, even me personally, I've gone through ups and downs. And I think being able to check in as a leader and understand where people are at and what they're looking for and where they currently are relative to that, I think is really, really helpful. Then in a more maybe group setting, both with direct reports, but also with the people that you work with. And again, this people first idea, I think, again, applies also to customers. I mean, it basically is central to product. The other thing I try to do is really listen. And what I mean by that is similar in concept to the asking for a why, which is communicating is really, really hard. And not everybody is. I think I would say most of us aren't good at communicating what we're actually thinking and what we want, especially when you get put on the spot and someone asks you a question. It kind of goes blah, 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 blah. And then it's kind of in there, but it's not always super clear, and it can be misinterpreted in 5 different ways, right? And so what I try to do is I try to go beyond thinking about what the person is saying, and I try to think about why the person is saying what they're saying. And there'll oftentimes be meetings where, for instance, someone will say something and then you'll kind of wonder, that didn't really make sense in the context. Like, why did they say that? And then I think what I used to do was I would respond to the actual question itself and then we would move on. What I try to do now is either in the meeting, and it's a skill I'm working on, if I'm able to, in the meeting, I try to get down to this is why the person's actually asking that. Or after the meeting, I'll think about, maybe this person was asking this because they were concerned about A, B, and C, or they were asking this and it didn't make sense to me because they had a fundamentally different assumption about what the project was trying to accomplish. So why were they asking about margins? This doesn't make any sense at this point, of this new product development cycle. Maybe it's because they kind of are assuming that that's what the project needs to accomplish. Let's make sure that I adjust that and I sync with them offline.
So I think with that, right, you talk about how you lead. And so I want to know, what roles are you hiring for?
Oh, great question. So I'm actually very happy to say that we just filled all of our roles, and that's been amazing. So I'm going to enjoy this moment and hold on to this feeling for as long as I can. But that said, we are always looking for roles, and I always want to be building relationships. I think that's the other thing, which is even though we don't have roles open, I'm always trying to reach out and talk to PMs, because you never know when a role's going to open. You always want to have that really good network built up. So I'm always looking for PMs who are, I think there's a couple different flavors of PMs that we hire for. I think there's the generalist PM, which is, user empathy, be good at maybe analytics and has some good design sense. There's also, more recently, we've started actually looking more for more technical PMs. So we recently hired a machine learning PM that used to be a data scientist. I think there's probably going to be more roles that we're going to open up there around whether it be machine learning or maybe platforms and infrastructure. And then lastly, I kind of view new product PMs as sort of a whole different breed in and of themselves, because for those, you kind of want people who are truly the jack of all trades, can sell, can think operationally, can think in a product way, and are usually a little bit technical because you need them to be able to assess what's possible or not. But if I may, I'd love to plug some roles that are open in some of my sister org, which is analytics in particular. We're really looking to hire a really inquisitive, curious folks to join our product analytics org to help bring basically both the quantitative research together with the really, really amazing qualitative research that we do.
So with that, I know we've talked a lot about leadership. What is one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring product leader?
I think my one piece of advice would be empathy. I think that's really core to it. I think the core part of being a really great product leader is to look beyond what is presented to you by either your direct reports when they say, I'm really stressed out, for instance, or when, a customer says, this is my certain problem. I think the biggest advice is that's the skill that really gets you from IC all the way to being like an amazing product leader. I think the best product leaders are just super empathetic and is able to really take a small signal and really understand what the source is and that's what's going to allow you to motivate and attract amazing employees. That's the thing that's going to be able to get you buy-in from all of your stakeholders around you and be able to disagree with them effectively. And that's also the thing that's going to allow you to really set an incredible, product roadmap that's really going to resonate with your customers.
Great. Well, on that note, where can people find and connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's just /in/Leo. So always happy to get any additional connections, especially if it's from aspiring PMs or, analysts or designers.
Well, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Kayla. Really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Leo for joining us on today's episode of Product Chats. For more product management resources, head to canny.io/blog, and we will see you next time.